It's at those moments that I think that we can relate to Mary. It's at those times that we can relate to one another. And it's at those times that we must call upon that great love, that awesome love that is bigger than anything that we can perhaps even imagine or have felt personally. That we call upon that love to get us through. To get us through. I look around our community and I think about the times in which we have hurt one another. I think about the times that we have ostracized one another, even in a community that is no stranger to ostracism from outside. And yet we still continue to do it within our own peoples. The times of great pain, the times that we have pushed out rather than called in, the times when we have judged one another. Can you imagine what it was like for Mary to have been judged by her community, and yet still she was willing to surrender to God's promise in her life? Today we're being called to find that place of love, even in the midst of our pain, even in the midst of tragedy, even in the midst of questions that we continue to have about, is God real? And we're being asked to surrender to that place of love, that same place that Mary surrendered to more than 2,000 years ago. To surrender to a place of love in the midst of pain. You know, it's easy to surrender to love in the midst of joy. It's so easy to surrender to that notion of love. Because those are the times when we have those ooey-gooey feelings that are going on in our lives. And yet, in the midst of our pain, how many of us throw out the notion of love and replace it with hatred? Replace it with, I'm going to get back at you? Replace it with all kinds of things rather than that place of love. Now, I understand that in the midst of all of this, we need also to give ourselves a reality check, for there are times when love, and especially in our intimate relationships, has certainly not been returned in the way that we have offered it to one another. Just this week, and I want to tell you a most difficult situation for me this week. I think I shared with you a few weeks ago about two members of our congregation. I'm not going to say who they are, but two members of our congregation who have been in an intimate relationship for 5 years, and for a period of time, there has been domestic violence in that relationship. And to the outside world, everything looked wonderful and glamorous. In fact, it was a relationship that I looked up to. And just recently, I found out that there was domestic violence involved, and it became so violent that one of the partners is now having to have surgery. Love in the midst of real pain. He was in court this week because he needed to get a restraining order against his partner. And I was called as a witness. Now, I want to tell you, as a pastor, that is one of the most difficult things to do. Most difficult things to do because one doesn't want to show favoritism. And I am not in their house at the time when these arguments are taking place. And so who knows what happens. We all put on a good show in front of our public, amen? And yet the reality is that in our own homes, we don't really know what others are going through. And so I struggled, I have to be honest, about whether I could be present or not, because I didn't want either to believe that I was showing favoritism to either side. Because I knew that as soon as I did this, one person would feel as though I had shunned them or had neglected them. And so I wrestled with my conscience about what I should do as pastor and what I should do for myself. And Steve, I'm sure as a pastor you've been through this, and Steve, you too, and Brad, you will, and perhaps have already. But it's the most difficult place to be when you love both of these people, and yet you know you must do what is right. And so I consulted with the staff. You know, sometimes my peers or my friends or my colleagues are helpful in situations like this, and I said, what would you do? And they were thankful they didn't have to make this decision, but the decision I came down to was that it was only right that I should tell witness to what I saw and what I heard. Nothing more and nothing less. And so I went to court with this young man this week, and of course his partner was present, and it was the most uncomfortable situation to see that I was on this side of the fence and not on that side of the fence, and I didn't know whether I was able to go up and say hello, and I didn't know if he even wanted me to. Love in the midst of pain. My love was for both of them, and yet their pain was so real. And so I decided that I should go with what I believe Jesus would have done and just been present to show support and to tell the truth as I understood it to be. Friends, I know that domestic violence is a part of our community, and we need to acknowledge that this morning, and to acknowledge that even in the midst of that great pain, this young man said to me, "But I still love him. I still love him," as tears ran down his face that he had to subject himself and his love for this man in this way. What are we doing to one another? What are we doing in this world today to demonstrate that we must find new ways of creating love? And not just the love of candy or chocolate or love of the cold. But what are we doing to demonstrate real love for one another? How are we demonstrating that love when people feel ostracized or people are feeling excluded? How are we demonstrating that we perhaps are called to take that higher road and to once again live from a place of love, even when others aren't operating out of that same place? Love in the midst of our pain. I want to encourage us this morning, as we have our own Advent questions, to find love in the midst of whatever is going on in our lives. To find love for the world. To find that place within our heart that we know that the love of God exists. To find love in the midst of our trauma. To find love in the midst of the times that we disagree. And to find love for ourselves, that there are times when we just need to step away. Just step away. Because that is the most loving thing that we could do for ourselves in these situations. For Mary and Joseph, they had a way out. They had to go and be counted in Bethlehem, and so they were able to step out of their community for a while they reconciled what was going on in their lives. It was a God-given gift to step out for a moment. And so today in our church, as we celebrate this Advent, as we celebrate the coming of love and joy and peace and hope, I call upon each and every one of us to ask ourselves, how can we operate from a place of love in the midst of joy and in the midst of pain?